Welcome to Energize and Revitalize with Dr. Amy. I'm Dr. Amy Cooper Smith, a doctorate prepared nurse practitioner, and this show is about empowering you to live a radiant, healthy, and balanced life. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Genevieve Camp. Genevieve is a licensed mental health counselor, a board certified art therapist, a certified IFS, internal family systems therapist, and a certified apprentice practitioner of evolutionary astrology. And she has a master's in art therapy, a bachelor's in fine art. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a few things, but the way I met you, I actually came across the internal family systems technique, if you will. I heard a podcast featuring Dr. Richard Swartz, who
Hmm.
founded this type of therapy.
Call it a
And
model. A model
a
is a good.
model. I
Yeah.
like the model. Yes.
Hmm.
So, and I was really intrigued by it. And I got his book called No Bad Parts. And I read through it, and he has some really wonderful exercises to explore these parts that we'll talk about.
Hmm.
But when I did, I said, I feel like I need a little more help kind of going through this and understanding it. And that's how I found you,
Hmm.
which I think is a really cool story because I was just looking for people licensed in this model
Hmm.
of communication, and I found you. But when I clicked on your site, you're here in Florida, as I am,
Hmm.
but you also have a place in Newburyport, Massachusetts, which which some of my listeners know. I am from Massachusetts, and I grew up very close to Newburyport. So I
Yeah.
felt like that was kind of a connection that we needed to explore.
I know. It's so strange and just feels like, yeah, sometimes, I don't know. I call it synchronicity, but the
Yeah.
sort of meaningful coincidences. And I've had that happen with other folks as
Mhm.
well, where there's some connection to my home, to where I
Yeah.
grew up. And even though I'm in Florida, and it always feels really meaningful. So, yeah.
Oh, so I always thought that was neat. And I've really enjoyed exploring internal family systems. So if we could start there, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so like I said, I would call it a model. It's not necessarily it was developed in the therapy context, but it is much more widely applicable than just as, a therapy. It's
Mhm.
something that can be applied to all different sizes of systems, not just, the internal system. And I was going to say it to me, it kind of feels like almost like a way of life. It's like once you sort of understand that lens, that way of looking at your internal world, it can become just sort of a way of being with yourself, and really empowers. You didn't ask this question quite yet, but sort of the difference between traditional talk therapy and IFS.
Yes.
One of the differences is that it really empowers the client to be able to do their own work, because it's not, the IFS therapist or coach is not viewed as the one who is the expert on the client system, or, is doing the healing. It's really more about helping the client to access their own inner healer and inner wisdom, so that they can then, do this work on their own.
I love that. So I used to kind of call it the voices in my head. But using this model, we kind of acknowledge different parts of ourselves, and we all have many of them. So it's just kind of getting to know your parts and understand them, which I think for me gives me a better understanding of why I am the way I am.
Yeah, just what you said. It's IFS is based on this idea that we don't just have one singular mono mind. Like our personality isn't singular. It's actually multiple. It's made up of many different parts or subpersonalities, each of which has its own set of thoughts and feelings and beliefs and perspectives, and set of priorities. So, we, whether or not people are familiar with IFS or not, we use parts language just colloquially all the time when, people talk about, like, a part of me feels this way, a part of me feels that way, or,
Mhm.
someone might say, like, oh, I feel really torn about something, meaning they've got sort of being pulled in two different directions. Or, I've heard people say, like, I'm of two minds about this issue. So it's something
Mhm.
that we're all sort of aware of because everybody experiences internal conflict at some point or
Right.
indecisiveness or, just difficulty knowing how they want to handle a situation. And it's often because, yeah, they have different perspectives going on in there. It's not just one singular thought or perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, some people have described parts therapy,
Hmm.
and this is a little different but similar. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, so IFS would fall under the larger umbrella of parts
Mm.
work or parts therapy. There's some different, ways of doing parts therapy out there, but IFS is sort of a specific way of working with those parts and understanding their different roles. And the other thing that's unique, well, it may not be unique to IFS, but it's very critical to IFS is this understanding of the self, which is the sort of core essential aspect that we all have that can't be damaged, doesn't need to be developed. It's just inherent to who we are. And the self is viewed as the sort of the natural leader of the system. And so when we're doing parts work, we're trying to help build a trusting relationship between parts and self so that the parts feel trusting that self can lead the way and they can step back a little bit and relax. Because when we're leading our life, when a part is trying to sort of lead the way or drive the bus to use the the driving metaphor, we we don't usually feel like our full authentic selves because not all of us is being represented, and we can sort of experience some internal disharmony or imbalance, when you've got some parts that are dominant and other parts that are maybe being ignored or brushed aside. So when we're self-led, we feel most like ourselves. And so self is the other key piece of the IFS model.
Right. So I think a lot of people can relate to maybe that negative voice, the one that's maybe not so nice. It says like you're dumb or ugly or something like that. So how does that part, let's say somebody had a part like that. How can they use that to connect with the self and go on a healing path?
Yeah, so because of painful life experiences, trauma, various types, we can call lots of things trauma. It's basically how it impacts you. So anything that felt emotionally painful,
Mm.
those emotions are some parts can end up sort of taking that on and carrying that if it wasn't resolved, if we didn't get the resolution from that experience. And so if we're carrying around some emotional pain, it kind of forces other parts into a protective role where they're trying to prevent that pain from reoccurring. And the inner critic is sort of a classic example of a protective part that it sounds mean, and at first glance, it can feel like, oh, this part's not on my side. This part is out to get me. But in getting to know the part and understanding why is it saying those things? What is it doing? We always discover there's a good intention underneath there. And so, in the case of inner critics, it's often, I would say, that the part is trying to preemptively criticize the system because if we've already told ourselves the negative thing, it won't hurt so bad when someone else says it. So it's a way of kind of
Mm.
protecting us from external criticism. But what that specific role is and what exactly that part is doing for each individual is something that that's what we would explore through that process of getting to know the part. And when parts feel understood, when they feel known and appreciated and yeah, and understood, then that's when they tend to feel more trusting that it's okay to step back because they trust, okay, there is a wise leader here who can who can guide the way. And so in getting to know our parts, they will naturally start to relax, and that's how we access more self energy. So
Yeah, I
it's
think
very
it's interesting.
counterintuitive. Yeah.
Yeah. Like to give the parts kind of a personality and
Yeah,
sometimes a name and really just getting to know them like you would any person, even
exactly.
though
Yeah, they
it's
have a
something inside
personality.
of you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. We can think of our parts as, unique entities. It's kind of a weird sort of taboo thing that a lot of people are sort of like, what are you saying? Have dissociative identity disorder or, and, no, but like for most people, no, like, that is sort of the extreme end of the spectrum, but all of us have parts and there's nothing wrong with that. It's how we're made. So There's nothing pathological about that. And that's, the other thing I really like about IFS is it's not pathologizing. It's not about saying, oh, there's something wrong with you. It's about really, respecting our systems, understanding how and why they developed the way they did, and really just, sounds kind of cheesy, but accessing unconditional self-love, to do the healing work. That's what, from in my experience, self has sort of the energetic signature of unconditional love. That's what it feels like when we're able to really connect into that. So it's, yeah, it's not about trying to like side with some parts and push out the other ones, like some other types of therapy might, try to get you to um, rationalize with an inner critic and, convince it it's wrong and give it all this evidence that, what it's saying is not true. But all that really does is creates more internal tension, because now you've got, you're sort of fighting against that part, as opposed to in the IFS model, really just listening to the part, understanding where it's coming from, and trusting that that will lead you where you need to go to do the deeper work if there is some deeper healing to do.
Yeah, and I like that because I have heard that other philosophy of, kind of trying to quiet down the parts that aren't behaving. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and just saying like, like you're wrong, like the part that's saying you're stupid, like, well, tell it it's wrong. Like you're not
Mm-hmm.
stupid. And you had kind of likened that to telling a toddler to be quiet. Like they're
Mm.
not going to be quiet until they're understood, right? And
Right.
so, someone having a tantrum is going to continue on until it gets what it needs, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, when we try to ignore our parts, it doesn't work. They just get louder.
so it's a really interesting technique. And, I think people who maybe have tried traditional talk therapy and just aren't getting where they need to go, or even someone who just wants to know more about themselves, I
Hmm.
think this, model might be something worth exploring.
Yeah, I think it's useful for everyone. You don't have to, like I said, it doesn't have to be something that's only done in a therapy office. You don't have to have, mental illness or being really,
Right.
struggling a lot to benefit from it. It's just a useful way of understanding yourself, like you said.
When somebody comes to you, how can you help them, kind of connect with their parts? Like, what are some things that you do?
Well, we all have parts around all the time. So it's more a matter of just kind of taking a moment of noticing who's here right now. I usually just start with people um, with whatever parts they notice in the moment. And so parts will show up in the form of thoughts, emotions, body sensations. Sometimes there'll be like an image or even like an impulse to do something. And so I'll usually just invite clients to notice who, what they're aware of in the moment. And from there, we can start to get a sense of the parts that are around, and kind of, sometimes there's more than one and we might choose, one part to start with. But I find that, whatever parts are most loud in the moment, those are the ones that you got to work with, because they're usually not just going to go away just because there's a different part you want to talk to. They're usually allowed for a reason because they need some attention.
So much like children, it's the children within ourselves, right?
Right. Yeah,
So many of our listeners are high performing people, professionals. How can this model help with issues like burnout, perfectionism, people pleasing, that sort of thing?
definitely. Yeah. I mean, like I said, self is a natural leader of the system. So when we have parts that have been working really hard and doing a lot of work for us, and um, lots of people have, like, our parts are good. We need them, and we can have parts that are super helpful. And, someone who's a high performer may have some really skillful, um, go-getter, high achieving parts that have really helped them to be successful in their career, say. But if that part is kind of dominant and leading the way, that alone can lead to burnout, because it means that not the whole system isn't sort of being utilized in a balanced, harmonious way. And just the fact that it's, parts that are doing all the work, it's not sustainable. Self is, when we're self-led, that's what allows us to show up authentically, and sort of access sustainable energy. For anyone, it's about kind of getting to know what are some of your dominant parts, what are the parts that do the most work for you day in, day out, and really appreciating them, loving on them, and understanding that they don't have to do it alone. Like they don't have to be working so hard all the time without support. So, that's kind of touching on burnout. Yeah, with people pleasing, perfectionism, when you say that, I think about, there might be parts that are really in a protective role, trying to make sure that other people are happy, that other people are pleased with the person, so that they don't disappoint anyone, or get criticized, or just feel bad. With any protective part, the assumption is they're protecting something. So getting to know, that part, and what they're doing to try to help the client. And then once you have a sense of what part they're protecting, it's often a much younger part that's feeling vulnerable, that's
Mm.
afraid of, being hurt again. And so then you can access that more vulnerable part and do some healing there. And that's the key that actually relieves these protectors of their burden, or of their job. They're doing what they have to do, but once you've done sort of that deeper layer of unburdening the vulnerable part, then the protector is kind of freed up to maybe help out in a different way.
So you mentioned younger parts.
Mm-hmm.
So do different parts become themselves at certain times in a person's life?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and I'm still open to learning about, parts journeys through the through the lifespan. I think,
Mhm.
the way I kind of conceptualize it is we're all born with sort of the all of our parts sort of in their seed form, in their sort of potential form, and then as we go through life, our parts sort of grow and develop with us. Um, but that said, I have, in my own experience with myself and with my clients, noticed that regardless of how old you are, you will have young parts. You will have, child parts, adolescent parts, parts, sometimes even parts that are older than your current age. So not all our parts
Mm.
do we perceive them as being our current chronological age. And sometimes that's because there's been some trauma, some like arrested development. The part was sort of stuck at the age when something happened, and it's still sort of caught up in that past time. But in my experience, even when you unburden those young parts, they don't just suddenly grow up and become your current age. They usually stay children, but now they're like free to actually be children. They're free to be playful and carefree, and and bring their youthful energy into the system. So yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing, and I don't claim to know, to be the expert in anyone else's system. So I'm always just learning from my clients, like about how they perceive their own parts, and what age they feel like to them.
So how did you end up getting involved with this type of model?
Yeah, so I first heard about it. It's like 2010. I was fresh out of grad school, and my first job, I was working in an eating disorder treatment center, and my supervisor at the time was trained in IFS, and I remember her talking to me about it a lot, and just really was a big fan, and particularly found it really helpful with eating disorder clients. And so it was always kind of in the back of my mind. Like, I was on the mailing list for trainings for many, many years, but could never make it work, because it would require travel and paying for airfare and hotel stays. It was just not accessible. So it wasn't until the pandemic, in 2020, when they started offering online trainings, that I could access it. And so yeah, it was sort of a long time coming, but I was finally trained
Yeah.
in 2021.
I love when, the pandemic was such a terrible time for a lot of us, but so many people took that as opportunity
Yeah.
and said, okay, I'm in this situation. How can I make the best of this? So that's really
Mm-hmm.
cool,
Yeah, and so many things became doable from a distance. Suddenly we realized
right?
all these ways that we could work with people, not having to be in person. And so that was also when I started seeing clients remotely, and discovered that I actually really like working with people in that way. Not
Yeah.
everyone does,
Well,
but yeah.
it's so convenient. So
Hmm.
because we're busy, and so to just take away the travel time, and it just,
Right.
allows us to do
Yeah.
a
And
little
some
more
people like to
productively.
be in the comfort of their own home. It's nice
Yeah.
to be able to be cozy in your own space.
So you and I have not yet explored the world of astrology. but it's
Mm-hmm.
something I find fascinating. So how did you get involved in that realm?
It's sort of a funny story. I didn't know a whole lot about astrology for a long time. My association with it was like, oh, it's, silly like horoscopes in a magazine, and
Right.
it never really seemed very serious and didn't seem very relevant for me. So I'd kind of just written it off as silly. But I read a book that it was a memoir, and the woman mentioned her astrologer. I was going through a rough time in my life, and something about, I don't know, something, it was just sort of the timing was right. There was this
Hmm.
thought of like, I want to look up this guy. And so I because she had given the name of her astrologer in the book, and so I looked him up, found his website, and saw that we had sort of some connections in terms of where he had gone to school, and people I knew. So there, it just felt aligned, and I made an appointment for a birth chart reading, and it was very impactful for me, and really helped to make sense of some things that I was going through, and sort of give it some context and some reassurance that it wasn't going to be forever. And so it really opened my mind to what astrology really can be about. That it's so much more than just what I thought it was. So I just started to look into it more, and it sort of became a special interest. I just wanted to learn as much as I could, so I started taking classes and just bringing it into my work with clients, and so it just kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, so you mentioned the birth chart reading. So can you describe what's involved with that?
Yeah, so the birth chart is just a sort of a map of the sky at the moment of your birth. It shows sort of where all the planets were, uh, with it, it's hard to describe a picture with words, but basically they're the 12 zodiac signs, and that kind of makes like a pie chart of 12. And then the planets fall into those 12 pie slices. And then there's also another pie of 12 slices of the houses, which have to do with sort of where these different energies are showing up in your life, which different domains. And so everyone has a birth chart. If you, not everyone knows exactly when they were born. You kind of need to know to the minute to have an accurate birth chart. But basically, it's symbolic. It's not astronomy. We're not talking about where the planets were if we're zoomed out looking at the solar system from outside, but it's really from the perspective of the person on the Earth, where were all the planets against the backdrop of the sky and the constellations. And so it's the planets, they symbolize different psychological functions, and then depending on what sign they're in, the sign sort of colors how they're expressed, sort of what the intention is for each of those planets. So it's a very complex system, and I kind of think of a birth chart like, like a lot of people are familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality
Yeah.
type indicator, like there are other personality type models. And I think of, with those, it's like there's a limited number of types. Myers-Briggs, there's 16. Enneagram, 9. There's like everyone has to get sort of put into a box with a limited number, which I never liked, because I feel like that I don't like being put in a box, and I
Right.
feel like that's limiting. But with astrology, it's sort of like a personality type model, except that there's as many different types as there are individuals in the world. So everyone gets their own
Mm.
unique type. And so it's the birth chart sort of like a map of your personality. But there's so much that can be gleaned from that. And it can be sort of a lifelong journey of understanding your birth chart. And that's not even talking about looking at transits and progression, sort of how the planets are currently and how they activate your birth chart. So there's just it's really vast, and I think the complexity of it is part of what I like about it, because it feels like there will always be more to learn, and keeps me engaged, and I don't get
Yeah.
bored with it.
Yeah, I had a reading done and I found it so interesting because, my sun sign's a Leo.
Hmm.
And so when I'm doing a podcast, I'm a Leo. But
Hmm.
I always thought, well, I'm not really like other Leos. And so
Hmm.
I found out that my rising sign was Capricorn.
Hmm.
And I've shared with my listeners, when I turned 50 and I started to go, what am I doing now? What am I doing next? And so much of how I am professionally, like
Mhm.
when I read that description of how Capricorns are in terms
Mhm.
of their profession, it was just like dead on.
Yeah.
And it was so helpful in terms of introspection and understanding myself.
Yeah, just what you said. I mean, not everyone who has a sun in Leo is going to look the same, right? Like that's
Right.
there's so much more going on in the chart. Where's your moon? Where's your rising sign? There's all these different
Right.
variables that play into it.
Super fun. Do you find that that's well accepted in your field? I've talked to different astrologers, and some of them feel like everybody is good and supportive, and some do get a little bit of blowback, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, in the little world that I'm in, it's pretty accepted. I kind of feel like it's becoming more. It's been around forever. It's one of the most
Yes.
ancient ancient systems out there for understanding ourselves in the context of, the larger world. But yeah, there'll always be skeptics, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Like I think, skeptics are they're protected parts, right? Like they're parts that don't want
Oh,
us to be duped, that don't want us to be fooled, and want to make sure we're not
right.
gullible. And so we can have, appreciation for that. And so, I'm not bothered by people who are, not into astrology or are skeptical about it. That's totally fine. I'm not here to push it on anyone.
Now you also do some dream work.
Hmm.
And so I think dreams are fascinating, our subconscious just telling us things. But are you able to, take a person's dream and incorporate that into their healing path?
Yeah, I mean, I just let clients know, hey, I find dreams fascinating. If you ever have a dream that's, interesting to you and you want to bring it here, we can look at it together. Our dreams, yeah, like you said, it's our subconscious bringing some information forth that is wanting to be integrated into the conscious awareness. And our dreams don't waste time telling us things we already know. So it's always information that we don't quite have conscious awareness of. It might be the missing piece to sort of understanding why we're, you know, doing what we're doing, or getting stuck in the same pattern, or just, feeling conflicted about something. So yeah, and with dreams, there's no finite number of meanings or layers of meaning a dream can have. So there's just a lot of information packed into the symbols that our subconscious comes up with.
Well, fascinating. So we're almost out of time.
Okay.
But if there was one thing you wanted to share with our listeners, one little piece of advice, what would it be?
Mhm. Yeah, well, if you're curious about IFS, or just kind of exploring your system in that way, the simplest thing you can do is to just start reframing how you think about what you're thinking, what you're feeling. So what I mean by that is, like, say you're feeling really angry about something, rather than saying, like, I'm really angry, it's I have a part who feels really angry. And just that simple rephrase of I have a
Mm.
part that feels blah blah blah, or that thinks blah blah blah, it creates a little bit of space between the part and the you that's noticing it. And it also acknowledges that there's other parts in there that may have different perspectives or different feelings. And it can just start to kind of create a little bit more space to get curious and explore, what's going on for you. And that might lead to just some more self-compassion, some more, insights. It's very disarming. Say you're in a conflict with someone and you want to tell them how you're feeling, so your partner is really pissing you off, rather than saying, like, I'm really angry at you. You could say, I have a part of me is really angry at you. I have a part that feels very angry. And that can just be received a lot more easily as well. So
Absolutely.
when we sort of incorporate parts language into just how we think about ourselves and communicate, it can just that little shift can make um, a lot of space for curiosity.
Well, thank you. How do people find out more about you and how to connect with you?
Yeah, well, my website is a place to go that connects out to other things that I have going on, but my website is just my name, GenevieveCamp.com. So on there, there's information about dream circles that I lead, and if you're curious to get on my mailing list, or do a free 20-minute consult to see if I might be a good fit for some individual work, all of that is there on my website.
Wonderful. And we'll put that on our notes page as well. Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to Energize and Revitalize with Dr. Amy. If there are topics you would like to hear about, please send an email to radiantpodcast2025@gmail.com. Check out past episodes on Amethyst Wellness YouTube. And we're now featured on Apple Podcasts and all your favorite platforms. Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review with a quick comment. It really helps us reach more listeners just like you. I'll be back next Saturday morning at 7:30 with more expert insights and practical strategies to help you live your healthiest, most energized life. Until then, stay healthy and here's to your best life.